I got this awesome shirt on Etsy. It made me go, heh heh heh. Back in my day, we had 9 planets in the solar system. Anyway, let's make some brownies. I found the best recipe for fudgy brownies. I tried this recipe and I was like, dang. I've made brownies from scratch before and I've tried the fudgy ones, but they're never fudgy enough for me. So if you're like me and you like fudgy brownies, I am super excited to share this recipe with you because it is so good. Let's go. Step number 1 in this recipe is to melt yourself an entire stick of butter. I prefer to melt mine in a pan because I find it melts more evenly and it's just easier for me. But you can put it in the bowl that you're going to use to mix up the rest of the ingredients so that you save yourself some dishes, and then just microwave it for a while, stirring occasionally and watch that it doesn't burn and pop in the microwave. And then we're going to add the rest of the ingredients in no order in particular, making sure that your egg doesn't roll away from you. So 2 whole eggs, 1 teaspoon of vanilla extract, a half cup of unsweetened cocoa. I used half dark chocolate and half regular unsweetened. A pinch of salt, 1 cup of sugar, a half cup of flour. And give it a good mix until everything is well distributed and no dry clumps remain. Optionally, you can add some chocolate chips, or here I'm adding espresso chips. I used about 1/4 cup. This recipe is made for an 8x8 pan, so that's what I'm using here. You can double the recipe and then use a 9x13 pan if you'd like to make a larger batch. But spray your pan with some cooking oil and then plop your batter in there and put it in the oven at 350 degrees for 20 to 25-ish minutes. Be careful not to over bake. It was very hard for me to tell the first time I made this when it was done and not batter anymore, because it does firm up a little bit more when you take it out of the oven. So I would not go above 25 minutes. Definitely pull it out of the oven at 25 minutes, if not a few minutes before. Even if it looks a little iffy to you, it'll probably firm up when you take it out. And nobody wants burnt brownies. I left mine in the oven for a total of 23 minutes, checking on them periodically, and it was perfect. These will have you just eating them straight out of the pan. They are just so good. It's so good. So a couple things about these brownies. When I made them, the first time I made them, this is only the second time that I've made this recipe, and I did tweak it a little bit. I added espresso chips because I really like the flavor of coffee and chocolate together, and I also really like dark chocolate. So I replaced half of the cocoa powder with dark chocolate cocoa powder. They turned out very, very good. I think I could replace the entire cocoa powder with dark chocolate and it would be even better. I'm also really interested to try other toppings or like mix-ins, like M&Ms or white chocolate chips or nuts, like walnuts. Also probably maybe some more weird things, maybe like pretzels or some like salted caramel on the top. Ooh, that'd be good. Anyway, there's just tons of things that come to mind to try to like add to it, put it as a topping, or, you know, change it a little bit so that it makes it different. But the base recipe for these is a super fudgy, delicious brownie, and that's the point. I have a very inquisitive nature, especially when it comes to baking. I like to know how ingredients affect the outcome of cakes, cookies, bars, like baked goods. It's my guess that the reason that it's so fudgy and the thing that makes it fudgy, like soft texture, is the butter, even at room temperature, because in the past when I've made brownies from a box, the fat that's called for the recipe or like to add to the box mix is oil. And I also looked up a couple of brownie recipes from scratch, and even the ones that use some butter in the recipe, oil is also called for, and oil is the main, like there's more oil in it than there is butter. And I really think that this one is fudgy because it uses mostly butter. Like you're using an entire stick of butter in here and only like, I think like a tablespoon of oil at the end, and it's optional. The reason I'm like thinking along those lines is because butter at room temperature is this, it's solid, but you can still, like it's still soft. Like if you push your finger into it, it leaves an indent of your finger. And this is the same. When I push into this, like there's an indent. I don't know if you can see that, but there's an indent in my finger, just like there is if I'm pushing on a stick of butter. Usually with box mixes, even the Ghirardelli one that I really like, if they've been sitting at room temperature for a while, they're not really like soft and fudgy anymore. They kind of get hard. And I usually warm them up in the microwave for a couple seconds to like make them fudgy and soften them and warm them up because they're tastier warmer. But with these, like this has been sitting out cooling for a while and it's still really soft. It's very soft. Like there's little to no resistance when I put my fork in. Like super soft and fudgy, delicious. And if you're like me and you like coffee and chocolate together, the espresso chips, so good. You could probably also use espresso extract, or you might be able to use like a little bit of liquid espresso, but I would hesitate with that because if you also notice about this recipe, there's no liquid. So that leads me to my next point about the butter. Typically, baking recipes are improved by using browned butter instead of just regular butter. And as I was melting my butter in the pan, I was kind of thinking to myself, should I make this brown butter? But I didn't. And the reason that I didn't is because I think that this needs the moisture from the butter and the egg, because that's the only moisture that it's really getting. There's no other water or milk or anything like that. I think if I were to use brown butter, I might add some other moisture, like a little bit of water or maybe even a little bit of like cream or milk or something, because the only other place that it's getting moisture from is the egg whites. And my guess is that it needs that moisture coming from the butter. Otherwise it might make it a little bit more dry. I haven't really like tested that theory or like played with it at all, but that's just kind of my guess. Anyway, that's kind of like a side note. If you're into baking and you like kind of dissecting recipes and the ingredients and stuff like that, I love that kind of thing, and experimenting with them. Baking is awesome for that. Just throwing it out there in case anybody's like me and you like to do that kind of thing. The other thing that I will bring up about brownies is the pan size. With brownies or bars or usually any baking recipe that tells you a size of a pan to use, it's very important to use exactly that size pan, because the temperature of the oven and the amount of time spent in the oven based on how thick the bars or brownies or whatever it is in the pan are going to be when they go into the oven. So what I mean by that is that if this is an 8x8 pan, if I doubled the recipe and then put it in this pan instead of a 9x13 pan, it would end up being really thick because there's nowhere for it to spread out to because I'm using a smaller pan. If you do that and it's too thick, the heat's not going to penetrate it all the way, and it'll be kind of like dough in the middle or batter, and the outside edges will be too done. The opposite is true if I use a larger pan. If I made this recipe that's meant for an 8x8 pan and I put it in a 9x13 pan, when I put it in, it would spread too thin and then it would dry out and it would be burnt. This recipe is really cool in that you can double it and you make a bigger batch, or like I love this for me and my husband because this is actually a reasonable size. Usually if I make baked goods, I make too much and then there's only 2 of us that are gonna eat it, so we end up eating it for like 3 weeks. In conclusion, I think the secret to fudgy brownies is butter. Butter as your fat, not oil. Be warned, you will want to eat the entire pan. For those of you that like fudgy brownies out there, I hope that you try this recipe, and I hope it comes out as good for you as it does for me, because it is delicious. This is gonna be my go-to brownie recipe from now until the end of time, because it is so good. If you like this video or you learned something, give it a like. If you'd like to learn more, subscribe to my channel. I upload every Friday. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. I'm gonna go eat way too much of this. Bye. Oh. I'm sorry, did you want this?